The smoke filled the air over the elven city of Sylvanthria's queen. Alara Moonwhisper stood on the highest tower of her palace, her hands gripping the cold stone railing so hard her knuckles turned white. Beside her stood Shadowfang, her dragon companion, his massive scaled body coiled around the tower like a serpent of midnight and stars. Together they watched the horizon burn. 7 realms had already fallen to the void swarm. 7 entire worlds consumed by the parasitic creatures that ate magic and life itself. Ilara had seen the reports from the last realm before it went silent. Cities turned to ash in minutes, forests withered to dust. Oceans boiled away into nothing. And now the swarm was at her borders. The Elven Queen was over 3,000 years old and had fought in wars that would make human. Conflicts looked like children playing with wooden swords. But she had never faced anything like this. The Void Swarm did not fight for territory or resources or revenge. They simply consumed everything in their path and moved on to the next world, like locusts through a field of grain her. Armies were broken, 12,000 warriors dead in the last month alone. Her best generals were gone, her magical defenses were failing one by one. The wards that had protected Sylvanthria for millennia were cracking under the constant assault. Ilara knew she had perhaps 2 weeks before the swarm broke through completely, and then her people would join the countless billions. Already dead, Shadowfang rumbled deep in his chest. A sound like distant thunder. He could sense her despair, even though she tried to hide it. The dragon had been with her for 2,000 years. Through wars and peace, through triumphs and defeats, he knew her better than anyone alive, and he knew she was considering the forbidden option, the summons beyond stars. An ancient spell locked away in the deepest vault under the palace. Sealed behind 7 doors, each requiring a different key. The spell had been created during the War of Creation 4,000 years ago when the Elder Gods still walked the realms. It was designed as a final, desperate measure to call a champion from beyond the known dimensions. The texts warned that using the spell could tear reality itself, that it might bring something worse than whatever enemy you were fighting, that the summoned being might refuse to help or might destroy everything just as easily as save it. The spell had been used only 3 times in all of history, and each time the cost had been terrible, but Ilara had no other choice. She turned from the railing and walked toward the stairs. Shadowfang uncoiled himself and followed, his claws clicking on stone. Neither of them spoke because there was nothing left to say. They both knew what had to be done deep beneath the palace in a chamber carved from solid crystal. Ilara placed the 7 keys into their locks and opened the final door. Inside was a simple altar made of black stone, covered in runes that hurt to look at. The spell had been written in the language of creation itself, words that predated any living race. She began to chant, her voice starting soft but growing louder with each syllable. The runes on the altar began to glow red, then orange, then white hot. Shadowfang added his power to hers, breathing a stream of silver fire onto the altar. The chamber shook, and cracks appeared in the walls above the city. A massive portal ripped open in the sky. It looked like a wound in reality itself, black and red and writhing with energy that should not exist. People in the streets below screamed and ran for cover. Some of the weaker elves fainted just from looking at it. The portal pulled at everything nearby. Trees bent toward it. Birds were sucked into it. Even light seemed to curve around its edges. On the other side of the universe, on a planet called Earth, Kate Morrison was having the worst day of her life. Her combat exosuit was covered in green ichor from the alien creatures her unit had been fighting for 72 hours straight. Her rifle was down to its last magazine. Her left arm was broken and held together by the exosuit's emergency stabilizers. Kate's unit was surrounded. 23 soldiers against what seemed like 1,000 of the creatures Earth's military intelligence called crawlers. They had come from deep space 3 months ago in ships that looked like they were grown rather than built. They wanted Earth's resources, and they did not care about negotiating Maya. Kate's younger sister was 10 meters to her left behind a burned-out vehicle, blood running down her face from a cut above her eye. She was still firing, though, still fighting. Kate had promised their mother she would keep Maya safe when they both enlisted. She had failed at almost everything else in her life, but she would not fail at that. Crawlers rushed forward for another wave, and Kate raised her rifle. She had 13 rounds left, and she would make every single one count. She started to squeeze the trigger when suddenly the sky above her tore open, a blinding light engulfed. And she felt herself being pulled upward. She tried to grab onto something, but there was nothing to hold. She screamed for Maya, screamed for her unit, but her voice was lost in the roar of the portal. The last thing she saw before everything went white was Maya's face looking up at her in horror. Kate crashed onto cold stone and immediately rolled to her feet, her training taking over before her conscious mind caught up. She brought her rifle up and swept the area for threats. She found herself in a massive hall, with pillars carved from white marble rising to a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. Hall was filled with warriors in silver armor that looked like it belonged in a fantasy movie. They all had pointed ears and carried weapons that glowed with their own light. At the far end of the hall stood a tall woman with white hair that fell past her waist. She wore a crown of silver leaves, and her eyes were the color of storm. Clouds beside the woman was the biggest dragon Kate had ever seen, which was saying something because she had never seen a dragon before, since they did not exist on Earth, or at least she had thought they did not exist. The dragon was the size of a small building with scales that seemed to shift between black and deep purple. Its eyes were silver, and they were locked on Kate with an intelligence that was distinctly unnerving. The woman stepped forward and began speaking in a musical language Kate did not recognize. The words were beautiful, but meaningless. Kate kept her rifle pointed at the ground, but her fingers stayed near the trigger. She was outnumbered about 100 to 1, but if they wanted a fight, she would give them one. The dragon moved its massive head down until it almost touched the floor. It exhaled, and Kate felt something shift in her mind. Suddenly, she could understand the woman's words. It was not translation exactly, but more like the meaning was being placed directly into her thoughts. The woman introduced herself as Queen Alara Moonwhisper, ruler of Sylvanthria, and she was asking for help. Her realm was dying. Her people were being slaughtered by an enemy called the Void Swarm. The ancient spell had reached across dimensions to find a champion strong enough to stand against them. Kate lowered her rifle slightly and asked why she had been taken from her own battle. From her own world? From her sister. Ilara explained that the spell searched all of reality for a warrior who met certain requirements. Someone who had faced death countless times. Someone who fought not for glory, but for survival. Someone who refused to surrender no matter the odds. Kate laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. She told the queen that Earth was losing its own war, that her planet was dying just like this one, that she was no hero, just a soldier trying to keep her little sister alive for one more day. She said the spell had made a mistake. Then Alara described the Void Swarm in detail. Creatures that consumed everything they touched. Ships that bent space around them. Technology that seemed almost alive. A hive mind that coordinated attacks across entire planets. Kate went very still as the queen spoke, because the description matched exactly what Earth scientists had been saying. About the crawlers, Kate realized with cold certainty that if the Void Swarm had reached this dimension, then Earth was next on their list. The portal had not been a mistake. She was standing in the future of her own world. Everything around her was what Earth would become if the crawlers were not stopped. Shu asked Alara if the spell could send her back. The queen shook her head. The summons beyond stars only worked one way. Kate closed her eyes and thought about Maya and her unit surrounded and probably dead by now. She thought about Earth and the 7 billion people who did not know. They were about to face extinction. Kate opened her eyes and looked at the queen. She said she would help, but not to save the elves. She would fight here to learn how to kill the swarm. She would study them and understand them, and then she would find her own way back to Earth, even if she had to walk across dimensions to do it. She would burn these creatures from her world or die. Triangulara offered magical weapons and enchanted armor, but Kate refused. She wanted her own gear. She trusted human technology over magic she did not understand. This seemed to confuse and almost offend the elves, but Kate did not care what they thought. Shadowfang growled at her, and Kate stared right back at the dragon without blinking. The queen assigned her chief artificer, Sophie Crystal Forge, to help Kate repair her equipment. Sophie was a frost elf with blue-tinted skin and white hair. She had never seen technology like Kate's before, and she was fascinated by it. Kate was equally surprised to find that the elf was genuinely interested in learning rather than just dismissing human. Sophie Crystal Forge had been the chief artificer of Sylvanthria for 600 years, and she had never seen anything like the human's combat suit. It was covered in dried alien blood and had burn marks across the chest plate, but the engineering inside was extraordinary. Circuits that carried power without magic. Processors that made calculations faster than any enchantment. Weapon systems that could target and fire without a single spell. Kate Morrison sat beside her in the workshop. Her face hard and closed off. She had barely spoken since arriving 3 days ago, except to give technical specifications. Sophie could tell the human was grieving, but elves did not intrude on private pain. Instead, Sophie focused on understanding the technology, and Kate seemed grateful for the distraction. The exosuit's power cell was damaged beyond repair. Sophie suggested replacing it with a mana crystal, but Kate refused. She did not trust magic she could not understand or control. Instead, they worked together to create a hybrid system. Elven metals that could conduct energy without losing power, combined with human circuitry that could regulate and direct that energy, took 5 days of constant work. Sophie learned more about engineering in those 5 days than she had in the previous century. Kate was brilliant in a way that had nothing to do with raw intelligence and everything to do with practical experience. She understood how things worked because she had broken them and fixed them and modified them in the field under enemy fire. The other elves in the palace watched Kate with mixed feelings. Some were grateful that she had agreed to help. Others were insulted that she had refused their magical weapons and armor. A few were openly hostile because they believed humans were lesser beings. Kate ignored all of them with the same flat indifference she showed to praise and criticism, alike Queen Alara had assigned. Kate quarters in the palace, but she rarely used them. She spent most of her time in the workshop or in the training yards. Sleep seemed to be something she did only when her body forced her to. Sophie worried about the human pushing herself. It's too hard, but every time she suggested rest, Kate would just start working on something else. On the 6th day after Kate's arrival, the commander of the palace guard, a tall warrior named Commander Lynn Starweaver, came to the workshop. She informed Kate that Queen Alara requested her presence in the training yard. The elite guard wanted to see what the summoned champion could do. Kate looked at Sophie and raised one eyebrow. Sophie shrugged because she was curious. The training yard was a massive open space surrounded by high walls. The ground was hard-packed dirt that had been stained dark by centuries of spilled blood. 200 elven warriors stood around the edges, watching as Kate walked to the center. She was still wearing her damaged exosuit because the new armor was not ready yet. Commander Lynn stepped forward and announced that they would begin with a simple combat assessment. She gestured, and 3 warriors stepped into the ring. They were armed with training weapons that could hurt but not kill. They were also each over 2 meters tall and had trained for decades. Kate was barely 1.7 meters and looked exhausted. The 3 warriors rushed Kate from different angles. It was a standard, overwhelming attack meant to test reaction time and defensive capability. Kate did not try to defend. She dropped low and swept the legs out from under the warrior on her left, used his falling body to block the attack from the right, and punched the 3rd warrior in the throat hard enough to drop him, choking. It took less than 3 seconds. The 3 elite warriors were on the ground before most of the watching elves had even registered that the fight had started. Commander Lynn's face went very still. She gestured, and 6 more warriors entered the ring. Kate sighed and rolled her shoulders. This time the attack was more coordinated. The warriors had seen what Kate could do, and they adapted. They came in pairs, covering each other's weaknesses. Kate moved between them like water flowing around stones. She used their own momentum against them, turned their strength into weakness, found the gaps in their defense that they did not know existed. One by one, the warriors fell. Kate did not waste energy on elaborate moves or flashy techniques. Every action served a purpose. Every strike was calculated for maximum effect with minimum effort. By the time the last warrior hit the ground, Kate was breathing hard and sweating, but she was. Still standing, the training yard was silent. Even Commander Lin looked shaken. Sophie realized that the other elves had expected Kate to fight like they did, with grace and form and careful technique. Instead, Kate fought like someone who had learned combat in situations where a single mistake meant death. It was brutal and efficient and completely without honor, but it worked. Kate had just defeated 9 of the best warriors in Sylvanthria without taking a single hit. Shadowfang, who had been watching from the wall, let out a rumbling sound that might have been approval. He jumped down into the yard and walked over to Kate. The human did not back away, even though the dragon was large enough to swallow her Holtha. Dragon spoke, and everyone could hear his words in their minds. He said that Kate fought like a predator, that she understood violence in a way most elves had forgotten. The elven people had been so powerful for so long that they had turned war into an art form. They had forgotten that sometimes survival required brutality. Kate looked up at Shadowfang and told him that on Earth, they did not have the luxury of fighting with honor. When creatures from space showed up trying to exterminate humanity, humans learned to fight dirty, or they died. She had watched too many good soldiers fall because they hesitated or followed rules the enemy did not care about over the next week. Kate trained with the elven warriors. She taught them techniques that made Commander Lin uncomfortable: ambush tactics, psychological warfare, how to use the terrain and the enemy's expectations against them. The elves learned reluctantly because these methods went against everything they had been taught, but they learned because they were losing the war. Kate also learned from them. She studied their magic even though she could not use it herself. She learned about the Void Swarm's weaknesses and attack patterns. She memorized maps of the fallen realms and the routes the swarm had taken. Every piece of information was another weapon she could use. The Void Swarm attacked a village 20 kilometers from the capital on Kate's 11th day in Sylvanthria. Queen Alara sent a relief force, and Kate insisted on going with them. Commander Lin tried to argue that Kate was too valuable to risk, but the human just walked past her toward the stables. The village was called Moonbrook, and it had 300 residents. By the time the relief force arrived, half of them were dead. The Void Swarm creatures looked like masses of black tentacles with too many eyes. They moved wrong, like they existed partially in another dimension. They dissolved anything they touched into gray dust. Kate studied the creatures for about 10 seconds, then started giving orders. She told the elven warriors to collapse the mine tunnels the swarm was using to approach. She identified which buildings could be turned into choke points. She organized the civilians into groups that could move quickly. The elves were shocked by her cold efficiency. She made decisions that sacrificed empty buildings to save people. She used the swarm's acidic blood to create barriers by killing creatures in strategic locations. When one young elf froze in fear, Kate shoved him behind cover and took his position without hesitation. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, 243 villagers were alive. The swarm forces were dead or retreating, and the elves were looking at Kate with something between respect and fear. Commander Lin approached her afterward and said quietly that Kate had saved more lives than should have been possible. Kate replied that she had done the math. Acceptable losses versus total casualties. She pointed out which decisions had saved how many people. Then she walked away before Commander Lin could respond. Sophie found her later sitting alone, staring at her hands. The human looked haunted. Sophie sat beside her, and they did not speak for a long time. Finally, Kate said that she kept seeing her sister Maya's face. She wondered if Maya had survived the battle on Earth, or if Kate had abandoned her to die. Sophie did not know what to say, so she just stayed. Shadowfang began spending more time around Kate after Moonbrook. The dragon was fascinated by her complete lack of fear. Most beings trembled in his presence. Kate treated him like a weapons platform that happened to be alive. She even suggested tactical improvements to his attack. Runche pointed out that he could use his size to create wind shear that would throw smaller enemies off balance, that his fire breath would be more effective if he varied the temperature and spread pattern, that his scales could reflect attacks back at enemies if he positioned himself correctly. No one had ever spoken to Shadowfang like this before. The dragon found himself actually enjoying conversations with the human. She did not worship him or fear him. She saw him as a tool, and also as an individual with his own thoughts. It was refreshing in a way he had not experienced in centuries. He started teaching her about the swarm. Sharing information from his long memory, after 2 weeks Sophie announced that the new armor was ready. She had worked nearly non-stop combining Kate's exosuit frame with dragon scales Shadowfang had provided. The scales were bonded too. Kate twisted to look at her own back in the polished metal mirror Sophie had brought. She could barely see the mark, but she could feel it now that she knew it was there. It felt warm and alive, like something separate from her own body. She had no idea how long it had been there, because checking her own back was not something she did regular. Jella moved closer, her hands shaking as she reached out, but not quite touching the mark. The queen's face had gone pale, and her eyes were wide with something that looked like fear mixed with awe. She whispered that she had not seen this symbol in 4,000 years. Not since the War of Creation, when the Elder Gods still walked the realms, as Sophie demanded to know what it meant. Kate pulled her shirt back on because standing half naked while people stared at her back was uncomfortable. Ilara took a deep breath and began to explain. Her voice taking on the formal tone of someone reciting ancient history. The seal of the first flame appeared only on beings chosen by the universe itself as a final defense against total extinction. They were called Burning Wardens, and they only manifested on worlds experiencing apocalyptic-level threats. Warriors who had been forged in endless conflict until they became something more than ordinary beings. The mark gave them power. Ilara explained. The ability to literally rewrite local reality when fighting extinction events. But it also meant something terrible. Burning Wardens only appeared when at least 80% of a world's population was projected to die within a single generation. They were the universe's way of trying to prevent complete annihilation. Kate felt her stomach drop. She asked what that meant for Earth. Ilara looked at her with deep sadness and told her the truth. The mark meant Earth was already falling. Humanity was already dying. Kate had not been running from her destiny when the spell pulled her through dimensions. She had already been living it. The human warrior's legs went weak and she sat down hard on the workshop bench. She thought about Maya and her unit and the 7 billion people on Earth. If the mark was right, then most of them were already doomed. She had been fighting to save them, but maybe they were already beyond savings. Sophie sat beside her and put a hand on her shoulder. Kate jerked away because she did not want comfort. She wanted answers. She demanded to know why the universe would mark her if Earth was already lost. What was the point of giving her power if her world was already dying? Jalera explained that. Burning Wardens appeared to give their worlds a chance. Not a guarantee, but a possibility. With the mark's power, Kate could potentially turn the tide of Earth's war. But she would have to learn how to use that power first. And that meant staying in Sylvanthria until she understood what she had become. Kate stood up abruptly and started pacing, her mind racing through tactical scenarios. If she was going to save Earth, she needed to understand the Void Swarm completely. She needed to learn how to kill them efficiently and permanently. This war in Sylvanthria was her training ground, and she could not afford to waste time. Shadowfang entered the workshop, his massive bulk somehow moving silently despite his size. He told them there was more to the story. Kate spun to face him and demanded he tell her everything. The dragon's silver eyes fixed on her, and he began to speak. Shadefeng revealed that he was not just Ilara's companion, but one of the 3 eternal flames, cosmic beings created at the beginning of time to guide and support the Burning Wardens. He had been in Sylvanthria so long that he had forgotten his true nature. Kate's appearance and her mark had awakened memories that had been dormant for millennia. The dragon explained that eternal flames and burning wardens were created as separate entities. They sometimes worked near each other, but never together. The fact that Kate and Shadowfang had met meant the threat they faced was worse than anything in recorded history. The Void Swarm was not just destroying worlds, it was consuming entire dimensions. Kate processed this information with the cold efficiency of a soldier receiving a mission briefing. She asked Shadowfang what powers her mark gave her, what capabilities she had access to. The dragon said he did not know because every Burning Warden manifested different abilities based on their nature and experience. The only way to learn was through combat. Through pushing herself to the edge of death and beyond, the mark would activate when she truly needed it. When the threat was great enough and her determination was strong enough, Shadowfang warned her that using the mark's full power would change her fundamentally. She would never be fully human. Agenka laughed at that, a bitter sound with no humor in it. She said she stopped being fully human the day she first killed someone in combat. The day she made the choice to survive, no matter the cost. The mark was just making official what was already true. She was a weapon, and weapons did not get to be normal. Sophie finally spoke up and said that Kate was still a person. Still someone with feelings and fears and hopes. The mark did not change that. Kate looked at the frost elf and her expression softened slightly. She thanked Sophie for the sentiment, but said that right now she needed to be a weapon more than she needed to be. A person Queen Alara declared that they would need to change their entire strategy now. With a burning warden and an eternal flame working together, they had a chance to do more than just defend. They could take the fight to the Void Swarm. But first, Kate needed to understand her abilities, and that meant combat. Over the next 3 days, Kate threw herself into increasingly dangerous missions. She led strike teams deep into swarm territory. She took risks that made Commander Lin furious. She pushed herself past exhaustion and pain. And slowly, she began to feel something stirring and her market started small. Moments where things went right that should have gone wrong. Bullets finding targets they should have missed. Enemies stumbling at exactly the right moment. Her instincts guiding her through situations that should have been impossible. Kate realized the mark was subtly influencing probability around her. She began testing it deliberately, taking calculated risks to see how far the mark's influence extended. During one battle, she jumped from a collapsing building, trusting that something would break her fall. And a sudden gust of wind appeared from nowhere to slow her descent. The mark was rewriting small pieces of reality to keep her alive. Shadowfang watched her experiments with approval. He said she was learning faster than any burning warden he had heard of. Most took months or years to understand their powers. Kate was doing it in days. The dragon attributed it to her military training and ruthless pragmatism. She treated her mark like a tool to be mastered, rather than a mystical gift. Sophie made a breakthrough in her research on the void. Swarm creatures. She had been studying the bodies of dead swarm units and discovered something disturbing. They were not truly alive in the conventional sense. They had no internal organs or biological processes. They were more like remote-controlled drones. She theorized that the individual creatures were extensions of a single vast consciousness, a hive mind that existed partially outside normal space-time. Killing swarm creatures in the field was like cutting the fingers off a hand. Painful, but not fatal. To truly stop them, they would need to strike at the mind itself. Kate understood immediately what that meant. They were fighting the wrong battle. Every victory against the swarm in the field was temporary because the consciousness would just create more units. They needed to trace the consciousness back to its source and kill it there. Anything else was just delaying the inevitable. Called a council of the remaining realm leaders. Representatives from 11 different worlds gathered in Sylvanthria's Great Hall. They were desperate and exhausted, their armies broken, their people dying. Some of them looked at Kate with hope, and others with suspicion. A human from a primitive world claiming to be their savior, Kate stood before them and laid out the situation bluntly. They were losing because they were fighting an enemy that could not be defeated through conventional warfare. The Void Swarm consciousness needed to be destroyed at its source. She proposed a strike mission directly into the swarm's home dimension. The realm leaders erupted in arguments. Some called her insane. Others said it was impossible. A few demanded to know why they should trust a human who had been in their dimension for less than a month. Kate waited for them to finish yelling, then spoke in a voice cold enough to freeze fire. She told them she did not care if they trusted her. She was going after the swarm consciousness, whether they helped or not. She was tired of watching people die in a war that could not be won defensively. If they wanted to keep playing soldier until the swarm consumed them all, then that was their choice. But she was done waiting. Shadowfang stepped forward, and his presence made everyone in the hall go silent. He declared that as an eternal flame, he would accompany Kate. His power, combined with her mark, might be enough to survive in the swarm's home dimension. More importantly, it might be enough to kill the consciousness. Permanently Eller stood and announced that she would go as well. The other leaders protested, but she silenced them with a gesture. She would not ask her people to risk everything while she stayed safe. Besides, Kate would need someone who understood dimensional magic to navigate the swarm's realm. The Queen's decision was final. Sophie volunteered next, saying that her knowledge of swarm biology and technology would be essential. The day before the mission, Kate stood alone on the highest tower of the palace, watching the sun set over Sylvanthria. She knew this might be the last sunset she ever saw. The mission into the swarm's dimension was almost certainly a one-way trip. But she had made peace with that, because dying while fighting back was better than waiting to be. Consumed, Sophie found her there and handed her a small device. It was the dimensional anchor the Frost Elf had been building. A piece of technology and magic combined that would theoretically allow Kate to find her way back to Earth if she survived. Sophie said theoretically in a tone that meant she was not confident it would work. Kate thanked her anyway and clipped the device to her armor. Even a small chance of getting home was better than no chance. She asked Sophie why the elf was risking her life on this mission. The artificer could have stayed safe in Sylvanthria. Sophie smiled sadly and said that her daughter had died when the second realm fell. She had nothing left to stay safe for. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear. Kate thought about Maya and wondered if her sister was still alive. Wondered if Earth was still fighting or if it had already fallen. The mark on her back pulsed warmly, as if sensing her thoughts. She had stopped being disturbed by it after the first weak Shadowfang landed beside them with a sound like thunder. The dragon had grown even larger in preparation for the mission. His scales now reflected starlight in impossible colors. He told Kate that she should rest before tomorrow, but she said she was too wired to sleep. He rumbled in what might have been amusement. The dragon asked if she was afraid. Kate considered the question seriously, then said no. She was angry and determined and focused, but not afraid. Fear was for people who had something to lose. She had already lost everything that mattered. Now she just wanted to make the enemy pay for Ikadoff. Fang said that was the mindset of a burning warden. They fought not because they hoped to win, but because surrendering was unthinkable. The universe chose beings who would keep fighting long past the point where any rational person would give up. That stubborn refusal to accept defeat was what made them dangerous. Morning came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Kate put on her armor and checked her weapons 3 times, even though she had checked them the night before. The rest of the team gathered in the crystal chamber beneath the palace. They all looked determined and scared, and ready. Grace Earthshield stood over 2 meters tall, her body made of living stone, covered in moss and crystals. She moved with ponderous strength, and her eyes were deep wells of ancient knowledge. She nodded to Kate, and the human nodded back. No words were needed between warriors, Nicole. Shadowstep was the opposite. Small and thin and wrapped in darkness that seemed to cling to her like smoke. Her eyes were completely black with no pupils or whites. She did not speak much, but when she did, her voice sounded like wind through a crypt. She gave Kate a thumbs up, and Kate returned it. Beth Flameheart blazed with inner fire. Literally, small flames danced along her arms and hair without burning. She was loud and confident, and had made several jokes about going to knock on death's door. Kate appreciated the attempt to lighten the mood, even if the jokes were. Terrible Queen Alara wore armor for the first time in centuries. Silver plate inscribed with protective runes. Her white hair was braided for battle, and she carried a staff that hummed with power. She looked every bit the warrior queen. She had been before politics and peace had dulled her edges, though. Representatives from the 11 realms gathered around their nexuses. Kate could feel the power building. The air itself seemed to vibrate with potential energy. Ilara stood at the center of the Sylvanthrian nexus and began the spell. The other realm leaders joined their voices to hers. Reality screamed. Kate felt it in her bones and her teeth and her mark. The seal of the first flame blazed so bright it shone through her armor. A massive rift tore open in the center of the chamber. It was a wound in existence itself. Looking at it hurt in ways that had nothing to do with physical pain. Through the rift, Kate could see impossible geometry. Colors that should not exist. Space that folded back on itself in ways that made her eyes water. This was the Void Swarm's home dimension, where the rules of reality were written by the Swarm consciousness. It was beautiful and terrible, and Wrong Shadowfang stepped through first. his cosmic form too large to fit properly in normal space. Reality bent around him as he entered the rift. Kate followed without hesitation. She felt the dimensional anchor activate, trying to mark her position. Then she was falling through spaces that existed between spaces. The team emerged into nightmare. The ground was not solid, but flowed like water that burned when touched. The sky had too many dimensions. Looking up meant looking down and sideways at the same time. Sounds came before the actions that caused them. Time ran in multiple directions at once. Gatesmark erupted in golden fire, and suddenly the area around her stabilized. Reality within a 3-meter radius became something she could understand. Breathable air, solid ground, physics that made sense. Her team huddled close to her, and she realized she was literally creating a bubble of normal reality in this hellscape. Pushed forward following Shadowfang, who seemed to navigate the impossible terrain by instinct. Swarm creatures attacked from angles that should not exist. They were even more horrifying here in their home dimension. Masses of tentacles and eyes and mouths that existed in 5 dimensions at once. Grace took point using her stone body to shield the others. The swarm's attacks bounced off her or shattered against her density. Nicole moved through shadows that led to places they should not go, appearing behind enemies to strike at weak points that existed across multiple dimensions. Beth launched fire that burned in spectrums beyond visible light. Her flames consumed swarm creatures and the dimensional fabric itself. Sophie modified her equipment on the fly, adapting to the alien physics. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency even as reality bent around her. Kate fought with cold precision, her mark guiding her strikes to hit enemies in all their dimensions simultaneously. She could feel the power growing inside her with each kill. The seal of the first flame was awakening fully. Reality itself was beginning to recognize her as one of its defenders. They fought for hours, or maybe seconds. Time had no meaning here. The team moved deeper into the swarm dimension, following Shadowfang toward the consciousness. They left a trail of dead swarm creatures behind them. Kate's bubble of reality expanding with each step. Grace fell first. She stood her ground against a dimensional collapse, using her body to shield the others. The living stone crumbled to dust, but she smiled as she went. Her last words were that her daughter would be proud. Kate screamed in rage but kept moving forward. Nicole went next. She merged completely with the void dimension to create a distraction. The assassin gave up her individual consciousness to become part of the enemy's realm, buying the rest of them precious time. Her sacrifice let them advance another kilometer toward the Corbeth. Burned herself out, holding back a wave of swarm creatures. She channeled so much fire that her own body became fuel. She laughed as she died, saying that at least she went out in a blaze of glory. Kate wanted to stop and mourn, but Sophie dragged her forward. At last they reached the center. The Overmind. It was a vast, pulsing mass of consciousness that existed as living mathematics. Equations of suffering and consumption. It filled the horizon and extended into dimensions Kate could not perceive. Looking at it threatened to drive her. The Overmind recognized Kate's mark and spoke directly into her mind. Its voice was like thousands of screaming voices layered over each other. It showed her images, Earth burning, cities turned to ash, oceans boiling away, and Maya, her little sister, dying in a crater still holding her rifle. The Overmind told Kate that Earth had already fallen 3 days after she was pulled through the portal. Humanity was extinct. Kate was the last human alive in any dimension. The Void Swarm had consumed her entire species, and now it would consume her, too. Kate felt something break inside her. The fury and grief and sheer weight of being the last human collapsed into a single burning point of rage. Her mark erupted in flames that made Shadowfang's cosmic fire look like a candle. These were the flames of creation itself. The same power that forged the first stars. She understood now what burning wardens truly were. They were not just defenders, but the universe's immune response. When reality itself was threatened, it created beings who could burn away the infection. Kate was not fighting to save humanity anymore because humanity was already gone. She was fighting to erase the thing that had destroyed them. Shadowfang transformed beside her, shedding the last remnants of his physical form to become pure cosmic will. Dragon and human merged, not physically, but conceptually. Two forces that should never have combined, becoming something entirely new. Kate and Shadowfang attacked the Overmind. Not just to kill it, but to retroactively erase it from existence. They unraveled the equations that defined its being, burned away every timeline where it had existed, rewrote reality itself to exclude the possibility of its existence. The Overmind fought back with the power of consumed dimensions. It tried to unmake Kate from history. Kate crashed into dirt and rolled to her feet with her weapon raised before her conscious mind caught up with her body. She was back on Earth in the same battlefield where she had been taken, but everything was different. The sun was setting instead of rising. The burned vehicles were intact. The crater where Martinez had died was just empty ground. Her unit was there. All of them alive and whole and staring at her like she had appeared from nowhere, which she supposed she had. Kate's armor was covered in substances that should not exist. Glowing with golden fire that slowly faded, her team raised their weapons, uncertain if she was friend or foe. Then Maya broke from cover and ran toward her. Kate barely had time to drop her rifle before her little sister crashed into her, hard enough to knock them both down. Maya was crying and laughing and demanding to know where Kate had been. She had vanished 3 weeks ago in a flash of light, and everyone thought she was dead. 3 weeks. Kate had been gone for 3 weeks by Earth's timeline. It had felt like months in Sylvanthria. She hugged Maya so tight, her sister complained she could not breathe. Kate did not care. Maya was alive, warm and solid and alive. The Overmind had shown her Maya dying, but that future had been erased. Lieutenant Harper approached cautiously. He was Kate's commanding officer, a good man who had kept the unit together through hell. He asked if Kate was all right and where she had been. She looked at him and realized she had no idea how to explain. Kate told him she had been on a mission. That was not technically a lie. Harper looked at her strange armor and the burn marks and the way reality still rippled slightly around her and decided not to ask more questions. He just welcomed her back and said they could debrief later. The crawlers, the alien creatures that had been overwhelming Earth's defenses, were retreating. Kate could see their ships in the sky pulling back. Her unit was cheering because they thought they had won the battle. Kate knew better. She had erased the void, swarmed from existence, and the crawlers were connected to it. Without the Overmind controlling them, they were just lost animals over the next 3 days. Kate watched as Earth's war turned around completely. The crawler ships fled or shut down. Their ground forces became disorganized and easy to defeat. Military analysts were baffled by the sudden change. Kate stayed quiet and let them theorize. She could not tell them the truth anyway. Maya stuck close to Kate. Her sister sensed something was different, but did not push. They had always been able to communicate without words. Kate was grateful for the quiet support because she felt hollow inside. She had one. She had saved everyone. So why did she feel so empty on the 3rd day after her return? Kate was sitting alone on a hill overlooking the base when Queen Alara found her. The elf appeared out of thin air looking exhausted but alive. Her silver armor was gone, replaced by simple robes. She sat beside Kate without asking permission. Kate asked how Alara had gotten to Earth. The queen explained she had used the last of her power to follow Kate across dimensions. She wanted to make sure the human had made it home safely. She also wanted to see the world that had produced a burning warden. Earth was beautiful in a way Sylvanthria was not. Raw and wild and full of potential. They sat in silence watching the sunset. Finally, Alara spoke. She told Kate that in Sylvanthria, the war had never happened. The 7 fallen realms were whole. The billions of dead were alive. Only a few people remembered the conflict, and they remembered it like a fading. Dream Kate asked about Sophie and Grace, and Nicole and Beth. Alara smiled and said Sophie was alive. She had never lost her daughter. Grace and Nicole had never fallen because the battles where they died had never occurred. Beth was somewhere making terrible jokes. Reality had been rewritten, and they were. All save Kate felt tears on her face and was surprised because she thought she had cried all her tears out already. Alara put a hand on her shoulder and told her she had saved everyone. Every human, every elf, every world the swarm had touched across 1,000 timelines. That was the burden and glory of burning wardens. The human asked if it was over, if she could finally rest. Shadowfang's voice rumbled in her mind, speaking from across dimensional barriers. The dragon told her yes, she had earned her rest. Somewhere on another world, a new mark was flickering to life, calling another burning warden, but that was not her. Problem, Kate realized the mark on her back had faded to a faint scar. Barely visible, she could feel it, but it no longer burned with power. Her duty was complete. The universe had used her, and now it was letting her go. She should have felt relieved, but instead she felt lost. Alara seemed to understand. She said that warriors often struggled after the war ended. They spent so long fighting that peace felt wrong. Kate would need time to remember how to be just human again. The queen stood and said she should return to Sylvanthria. Her people needed her. Kate stood too and hugged Alara. The elf queen stiffened in surprise, then hugged back. Kate thanked her for everything, for the training, for the trust, for following her into hell and back. Alara said that Kate had done all the hard work. She had just helped guide her before she left. Alara gave Kate a small crystal. She said if Kate ever needed to contact her, she could use it. The magic would work even on Earth. Kate accepted the gift, knowing she would probably never use it, but appreciating the gesture. Then Alara vanished in a flash of silver light. Maya found Kate an hour later, still standing on the hill. Her sister asked who she had been talking to. Kate said just an old friend. Maya looked skeptical but let it go. She told Kate that Command wanted to debrief her about where she had been. Kate groaned, but nodded. The debrief was long and frustrating. Kate stuck to the basics. She told them she had been transported to another dimension, had fought hostile aliens there, had destroyed their command structure and returned. She left out the parts about being a cosmic warrior chosen by the universe. The intelligence officers wanted to study her armor. Kate refused. The armor was bonded to her and removing it was not happening. They wanted to know how to replicate the dimensional travel. Kate told them she had no idea. She was not lying. The spell that brought her to Sylvanthria was one of a kind. Eventually they gave up and let her go. Kate returned to her unit and tried to fall back into routine. But everything felt wrong now. The missions were too easy, the threats too small. She had fought beings that existed in 5 dimensions at once. Earth's problems felt trivial in comparison. Maya noticed Kate pulling away and confronted her one night. She demanded to know what had really happened. Kate tried to brush her off, but Maya was persistent. Finally, Kate told her some of the truth. About the Elven realm and the war and the mark on her back. I listened without interrupting. When Kate finished, her sister asked to see the mark. Kate showed her the faded scar. Maya traced it with one finger and said she believed Kate. She did not understand it, but she believed it. She asked if Kate was okay. Kate realized she did not know how to answer that. She was alive. She had saved everyone. She had completed her mission, but she felt empty inside. Everything she had cared about before felt meaningless now. She had seen the universe's true face, and it was hard to care about ordinary things. Maya hugged her and said, that was normal. That soldiers coming back from deployment often felt disconnected. Kate would need time to readjust. Her sister would help her. They would figure it out together over the next few months. Kate slowly learned to be human again. She stayed with her unit because the routine helped. The missions gave her focus even if they felt insignificant. Maya was always there supporting her, reminding her that small things still mattered. Earth's governments studied the crawler technology left behind. They learned to build better ships and weapons. Humanity began to look outward to the stars. Kate watched and wondered if they were ready. She had seen what was out there in the dark between dimensions. 6 months after her return, Kate was promoted to captain. Command wanted her to train new special forces units. She accepted because teaching felt purposeful. She could prepare the next generation for whatever threats might come. One night she took out Alara's crystal and activated it. The queen's face appeared in the air, looking surprised and pleased. They talked for hours about nothing important. About their lives and their people and the strange peace they both struggled with. Alara told her that Sylvanthria was thriving. The realms were united in ways they had not been before. People remembered enough of the erased war to appreciate peace. Sophie sent her regards and had included a schematic 4-dimensional anchors in case Kate ever needed to visit. Kate laughed at that. Maybe someday she would visit, see Sylvanthria in peacetime, meet Sophie's daughter who was alive now. It was a nice thought, even if she never acted on Ita. Year after her return, Maya got engaged to another soldier in their unit. Kate stood up at the wedding and gave a speech about family and survival and fighting for the people you love. she meant every word. This was why she had burned away the Void Swarm. So people could have moments like this. 2 years after her return, Kate was offered a position at Strategic Command. They wanted her experience planning large-scale operations. She accepted and moved to headquarters. It meant less fieldwork but more influence. She could shape humanity's expansion into space late at night sometimes. Kate would look up at the stars and remember falling through dimensions.